Hi, my name is Andy Cohen, and I am a solution architect on the sales engineering team. What I'm going to show you is a few extensions that I have made to the Sitecore CMP connector. And let's see here, let me bring up my slide to talk about what I have done. So the first thing that I've done is I've added support for datetime fields. I've also added support for related assets or a related entity that is an asset or an M.Asset type. It auto creates the public link if one does not exist as a Sitecore DAM asset. So wherever there is an image field on the template that you have mapped, it shows up as a Sitecore DAM image. So this needs both the CMP connector and the DAM connector installed on the Sitecore instance. The next thing that I've done is I've added related entities support, or rather related entity support, onto a mapped entity in Sitecore, but it brings those mapped fields directly onto the original Sitecore item, and I'll show you an example of that. It's a flattened Sitecore item. The next thing that I've done is I've added related entities that are synced, and again, that's multiple entities, and it supports the CMP M.Content, any of those content types, and any other entity types that are free modeled or not. And the last thing that I've done is I have synced the strategy audience from Content Hub on the content item to a Sitecore Profile card. And that's useful for content tagging and personalization. And I've been told that in version 3.4, there will be a new field called Persona, which more closely maps to what that field actually is going to be. So let me switch screens and show you my Sitecore instance and my Content Hub instance, and I'll show you what I have. So, all right. So on the left, we have my Content Hub instance. On my right, I have my Sitecore instance. I have a bucket for recipes, and I have defined that recipe mapping. It's a standard entity mapping from CMP, and it maps to an M.Content type.recipe, and it goes into the recipes bucket, and it uses the recipe entity template. The recipe entity template looks like this. It has a couple different sections. It has a primary section with the title, publication date, and notice here's the first thing, the date time field support. Then the second thing is the image, which is an image type, and that will map back to a Sitecore DAM image. Then I've created this other section, this author section, which is supposed to pull a related entity directly onto the Sitecore template, and that's the flattened approach. And then I have a strategy section just to demonstrate that I can also pull in an audience onto this as a flattened related entity. And then I also have a relations section, which is a multi-list with search capabilities. It links back to a different area of the tree. It's a relational field. So that's how my template is defined. I've also added profile cards to this. I mentioned that before, and these map back to the demos. Health focus, need a boost, not applicable, on the go, sporty, variety seekers. These are the keys, and these are the profile cards, and each one of them has 100% of the value as as the related key. So health focus has the profile key for health focus as 5. The max value is 5, so that's 100%, and so on. For each of these, need a boost 5, not applicable 5. All right. So if you don't know about profile cards or content tagging, those are the very, very basics to get it going. You'd find an item in the Sitecore tree and you'd tag it to a profile card, and that's useful for personalization. That closely maps back to the strategy in Content Hub. You have the audience up top, and again, I'm told that this is going to be or maybe there's going to be a different screen for strategy that shows persona, this new field. So I can switch over to recipes. And I'm going to be paying attention to, let's see, let's look at the pie recipe. And on my pie recipe, I have an image, I have the title field, and I'm not really filling out much else. I also have the audience filled out as need a boost. And I also have a related entity, which is an author. And the author entity looks like this. It's just a taxonomy. And there's 2 authors right now. There's Andrew Cohen and Kevin DeTroya, and they have a label, a name, a headshot, and of course it links back to the recipe details. You can see on the content type for the recipe, that links back here in the recipe details. And again, here's that publication date that I mentioned. That's the date time field. So how all this fits together, right now I have this set to trigger on publish. So when I publish this, we're going to see it appear here. I'm sorry, it's going to appear in the recipe bucket, and the authors should get synced into the authors. Before I go further, I want to talk about a couple other things that I did. So the default kinds of field mapping that you get have typically just a CMP field name and a Sitecore field name. Well, I added that the 2 other kinds. I have a field relation mapping, and that's for that flattened relation that shows up. And that looks like this. It has the CMP relation field again, and it also has the Sitecore field name. But it has a CMP field name and then the Sitecore field name. And then it has this other field called CMP relation, and this maps back to the CMP related entity field. The other kind of mapping that I created is an entity to entity mapping. And first, to get that to work, I created a new kind of entity mapping called free entity mapping. And a free entity mapping has the same kinds of options. It has field mapping and field relation mapping. And the definition of this free entity mapping has the name field for pulling in the related entity into the bucket. It needs a name, of course, for the Sitecore item. So it pulls it from this just maps to which field I wanted to create the item based off of. Then it maps back to a bucket, and then the template that it's going to use, and then the Sitecore field name. So actually, excuse me, this one isn't actually used. This was a remnant of a field that I no longer am using, so just ignore this portion. So the entity to entity mapping looks like this. It has the entity mapping, which is a mapping back to the entity author. So this maps directly back to this author. Then it has the CMP relation field, and then the Sitecore field name. Again, I moved this field over under this item. So ignore this, and it's really here. So the next thing that I want to show you is how all of this works together. So configuration aside now, here is the bucket, and it's currently empty. It has really nothing in it. It just has the bucket folder. That's all you can see when you run the Sitecore bucketed search. So if I publish this over here, it should trigger that the trigger gets run, and then it pushes out to Azure Service Bus, and this Sitecore instance reads the Azure Service Bus configuration, and suddenly it'll read from the queue, and we should see these in here in a second. The bucket should show up. Any day now. Publish. There we go. All right, so here it is. So the recipe bucket, you can see it is synchronized pi. Pi is now here. And it also will have authors related to it. If I search here, another thing I want you to see is that there's also has this recipe authors facet. And where this comes from is because this is a reference field in Sitecore, I'm able to facet on that field. So if you look at my bucket settings, bucket facet, I added a new global facet called recipe author, and it just looks at the authors field in the Solar Index. So back to the recipes, we have pi, and pi, this is the title, we have that publication date, then we have the Sitecore DAM image directly here. The next thing that I was showing you was the authors section, and again, this pulled that author entity directly onto this Sitecore item pi as a flattened entity. Additionally, I pulled in the need a boost because I wanted to get the label directly onto the strategy section. And the last portion that I have is that relation section, and this references the author that it had synchronized when it actually pulled in this entity and added it to this bucket. So if I searched in authors, you can see that Andrew Cohen is right here. So on pi, well, I guess that's really everything that I've done here. The last thing that we have is the audience mapping. So the audience is, this essentially has the audience identifier from the taxonomy item for the CMP audiences. And then you set up a profile card to match that. So each one of these are just content items, and you would create a profile card, or you would map it directly back to a profile card. And when the item is created in Sitecore, and for example, the pie recipe, it has the profile card already tagged for need a boost. So just to demonstrate that again, if I was to unpublish this, I'm going to edit it. I am going to change the title, save that. I'll even add, oh, that's some kind of error on the Content Hub side. So I'm going to edit I'm going to make this 2 authors just to demonstrate that. So I'll add Kevin and myself as authors. Again, here's the publication date field that I mentioned. And then on the strategy side, I'm going to change it from need a boost, which we saw already here in this profile card. I'll change it to sporty. So I'll edit that. I'll delete this. I'll add sporty. And I'll save it. All right. So now we have those final edits. We should see the title. We should see 2 authors. Again, there will be another author synced in there. Kevin, we'll see Kevin and myself. And we'll see the new strategy for sporty. So if I publish this, give it a little bit. While that's going, I'm actually going to synchronize another content item. Let's go back to the strategy. And switch back to recipe, and let's see. Let's do fruitful mocktails, maybe. Let's do a different one. Let's do this one. This has health focus, and it has Kevin. So I will publish this. And if I come back here and go to my recipes, and I search this, hopefully the pie should have synchronized by now. And it should say pie is good. Oh, it doesn't. Not yet. Oh, there's flavorful mimosa. So back to pie. It hasn't synced the name yet. But I'll just go to flavorful mimosas and we'll see that. So for the strategy for the flavorful mimosas, our flavorful mimosa, or salsa, excuse me, salsa. We had the strategy of health focus, and you can see that's health focus, and we should see that tagged here as health focus. And if I go back and I search on this, we now see Kevin in here as a facet. If I go back to authors, I can see Kevin in there. And let's see if our pie has now synced. Yep, pie is synced. And this one will now link to two authors, Andrew and Kevin, and to also demonstrate that faceting functionality. If I search for Kevin, there's only one of them tagged with Kevin and two of them tagged with Andrew, I believe. Or it may be the other way around, let's see. So if I search to Andrew, it's just one. If I clear the facet and go back to Kevin, it's two. So there you have it. That's my demo of the things that I have extended into CMP, the CMP connector. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.